Welcome to the EX Conversation. In this episode, I sit down with Chuck Gose, one of the biggest names and boldest voices in employee experience, and we get to hear his candid takes on what's really going to drive employee experience and internal communication forward for the next era. Also, he talks a little bit about the value of communities like ICology in progressing the profession. So, let's get into it. Welcome to the EX Conversation. I have known about you, Chuck, pretty much since I have been in the industry, but you've had quite a different sort of career. Walk me through your career and where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great to be here with you, Kaz. My career, I've always said I've had one foot in comms, preaching about the value of tech, or one foot in tech, preaching about the value of comms. So I've had the privilege of being in internal comms for a lot of great organizations like General Motors, Rolls-Royce, American Cancer Society, and others. But it was in those organizations where I sought out and found out the value of technology and doing it the right way that then I jumped over into the tech world where I've been ever since. And in the tech world, preaching about the value of comms and what that brings to organizations. And then now with ICology, which is now 10 years old, what started as a podcast, evolved into a community, that is now my focus. Being inside the community, bringing internal communicators together, creating ways for them to engage, but also then being outside the community, working with organizations like Unily and how we can talk about the value that internal comms brings to the industry and companies in general.
No, so tell me a bit about ICology, because I obviously love community. It's kind of part of my role here at Unily, but also I know that you've kind of got the comms community. It's quite a large community. So what are the sorts of things that go on in ICology?
Yep. So we're now around 270 members, and it is a paid community. And that's important for me to distinguish is that we wanted people to invest in themselves. And by investing in themselves, they're then investing in this community. We've also made it very affordable. We never wanted it to be a place where people all of a sudden realize, oh, no, my employer may or not pay for this. How can I afford it? We wanted it to be very affordable for people to do it so they could make that investment in themselves. And it's very member driven. Yes, I help organize what happens inside the community, but it's never the things that I want to do. It's what do the members want to learn? Who do they want to connect with? That's very much what ICology is about. When we started it, I will admit, we were a little concerned that are we just building a community where we're just going to already know everybody? Where it's just going to be the friends and we're just end up talking to each other like we always do. The highlight has been having people join who I would not have known otherwise and building those connections and knowing they are meeting people that they would not have known otherwise, and not just having connections, but now true friendships that have developed inside ICology. So I make sure that at least several times on a monthly basis, we get together virtually to talk about topics that the community says to me they want to connect on. We also do some in-person experiences as well that are outside the community. So we do a flyover festival every year in August in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And we do it there because, one, our community wants to do it there, and nobody else does anything in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So we go there, host flyover festival. We're also part of Transform coming up as well, hosting the X Factor Summit. So yeah, really trying to make ICology the central hub of activity for the internal comms profession.
So what caused you to be so kind of prominent in the community? Because when I first started my role here at Unity, one of the things I did was to try and understand, who are the internal comms influencers, who's got something to say in the market that's interesting. You obviously came up right at the top of my list. Was that a natural thing? Did it grow organically, or did you make a decision to say, hey, do you know what? I'm going to pioneer this community?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. One, I'm never shied away from a microphone or a stage in any opportunity.
We have that in common.
I am also quite noisy, so I'm not afraid to share a lot and communicate a lot. In fact, maybe at times I overshare or over-communicate, but that naturally evolved into finding my voice in the space. But ultimately, that was the cool thing when ICology started as a podcast. It was initially launched with the idea of having a way to bring in new voices into the internal comms world, where even I'd been in this world for so long, I was growing a bit tired of hearing the same voices over and over and over and over again. And so I started the podcast, knowing obviously my voice would be featured in the podcast. So I recognize that. But the idea was bringing in new voices into the internal comms world. And that's still very much what ICology is about. It is finding these new leaders, these new communicators who have new ideas, great things that they're doing, and elevating them so that they feel confident in sharing their successes.
Yeah. When it comes to the community, you've got a lot of data points, you've heard lots of stories, you see lots of what's happening on places like LinkedIn. And so you've got a lot of insight into the community. At what point did you realize the kind of value of internal communication? And was that like an aha moment, or was it something you in your own roles found out? Like what was it?
Yeah, I remember the moment where I had this thought. And this goes back to my time when I was at General Motors, which I was a communicator at a factory, at a metal fabricating plant. So not a glamorous environment, not a glamorous job at all. The predecessor in my role, they did about 80% external comms and then about 20% internal. When I got into the role, I basically flipped those numbers. In fact, I even did probably more 90% internal, 10% external, because I saw that the effort I was putting in to communicating with employees, keeping them informed, coming up with ways to engage them, the return was exponential compared to the external comms, even down to moving my office to the factory floor.
Wow.
Because I wanted to be closer to that audience. It was a probably about 4,000 to 5,000 employees that were there. I would much rather be closer to that larger percentage of frontline employees than in the offices. And I think that's what one of those differences it made, that when I made the transition from GM to Rolls-Royce, I just did the same thing.
Mhm.
I just asked, hey, can I have my office out on the factory floor? Because I wanted to be central to where everything was happening in the business.
It's funny because you mentioned frontline there. I feel like I see a lot of talk about trying to get through to frontline audiences. And I think sometimes people can get buried in books and research and struggle to literally get on literally get in the environment to try and understand those people better. What are some of the kind of outcomes, or like, what did you learn in that process?
To physically put yourself into their environment, to have a better understanding of what their day-to-day life is, to know that their life may or may not revolve around looking at a laptop or a screen or a phone. Their job is tied to certain effort, whether it's retail, hospitality, or in my case, manufacturing. They're the ones doing the work. They're the ones generating the revenue for the business. And so I just wanted to be closest to them and just listening to their conversations. Probably one of the best experiences I had on the front line was long before I got into the comms world. I worked at a General Motors factory as college help. So my father worked for General Motors. In fact, I have his name badge here at my desk every day. He they hired kids of workers to come help during the summer. People take vacation, you come work on the line. So I got kind of adopted into this little micro community inside the factory where these people would work these same jobs for 10, 20, 30 years. I just got immersed into this micro culture of that team and saw the value and the teamwork and the camaraderie and how much their work meant to them. Even if I think sometimes people look down on frontline work, I do not, because I see the hard work that goes into that. And I saw it in my own experience working on the line.
Hearing that about your younger experiences totally makes sense to the person you are today, because I guess it's embedded in you, the comms, the community, the camaraderie. That totally makes sense to me now. Like, that explains the Chuck that I know and love. So I also wanted you to be able to bring a certain topic that you feel passionate about, that you think is either a challenge in the industry that we need to overcome, or like a big opportunity. Knowing you, I've seen you do a few different talks, each excellent. You've got a lot of opinions and a lot of strong thoughts about what we can change in the industry. So what have you got for me today?
I think, well, thank you for that. I do have a lot of opinions.
It's true though, isn't it?
I'm never shy on those. It is true. I think the thing that I guess I would call it like the itch that I'm scratching now is all around employee listening. I'm trying to spend a little more time to understand what companies are doing. What do they think they're doing? What do they think they're doing that they're not doing? Are they really listening? Are they just asking questions? Like, what are they doing with it? And just understanding what are the different signals in a business that point to employee listening, that is not engagement surveys. That's not focus groups. And looking at things like, if you were to say like employee referrals for open jobs, if you see employees are actively referring their friends, their families, their networks to work at your company, that's a signal. Are companies listening to that? What if at one point that was really high and then now very few employees are referring for open jobs. That's not a focus group. That's not a survey, but that's listening. And so what are all those different signals that employees are putting out there that they're not even aware of because it's very singular to them? But what are all the different signals out there that companies should be listening to that go far beyond the surveys and focus groups and stuff like that?
If I'm a layman in the industry, I feel like I've heard about employee listening, right? It's kind of been one of those buzzwords, but to a lot of people, that means asking specifically, it's the engagement survey. It might be more frequent than that, but what else is fit to you is part of employee listening?
So I think it is the things that I was somewhat dismissing as the obvious ones, like surveys, focus groups, the flash surveys, all of those things that are happening. I think that's very much a push to employees. I want to look at more what's the pull? What are the avenues that employees have to share that sit outside of those kind of normal structures that exist? But also, what are the behaviors that employees have that are those signals? Like referring for new jobs. What are other behaviors? Is it taking PTO time or not? Is it frontline employees taking sick time or not? What does presenteeism and absenteeism look like? There's all these behavioral signals that employees are sharing that I don't know. I want to know and ask the question to companies, are you listening to those? Are you paying attention to those?
Presenteeism, absenteeism is just looking at things like trying to understand things like sickness, etc., and trying to basically understand the picture of our employee base, our workforce, and the outcomes for the business based on some of those signals, right?
Absolutely. And understanding what's that impact having and what can companies do or learn from those things. And everything's going to go through cycles. There's going to be ebbs and flows of all this. As leaders change, there's going to be ebbs and flows of all this. But that's part of the listening, as we see that too, that there are leaders sometimes that come in and they're like, nope, this is what we're doing. I've got the plan. I've got the solution. Let's go. Whereas you've got the other leaders who come in and say, actually, I'm going to sit back and learn and read the room a bit to see what the next step is. And so even those leadership styles are going to value what employees have to say, share, or behave like differently.
Do you think there is a kind of new leadership style that is understanding these types of listenings, has their ear to the ground more? Isn't that kind of more traditional way of leadership? Do you think there's like a new type of leader that's required that listens in new and different ways?
That's a really good question. I would like to think there is, but I'm not seeing it as much. So if anybody that listens to the podcast I do with Jenny Field called Frequency, you will hear it time and time again that I hold leadership to a very high standard. I expect a lot out of leaders, and then therefore I am often disappointed by the way leaders act. And I think because a lot of this is they say the things they think should be said, but their own behaviors don't back that up. They might say, yes, we listen to employees, but really all they're doing is digesting some data points from a survey. They are not actively out there talking to employees. They are not actively out on the front line spending time with employees and not just listening to it, but doing something with what the employees are telling them and making sure that the employees can speak truth to power. I think you have to admit or recognize that if you're a leader going out to a frontline employee, that is a big potential intimidation factor for that frontline employee. They may not feel like they can share what's really happening for fear of getting their manager in trouble or their managers in trouble. And so I think recognizing that power disparity between leaders and frontline employees, making sure they can do whatever they can to knock that down so that employees can openly share what's happening.
They're doing like a do as I say, not as I do type thing.
Well, and I think there's a really interesting neuroscience model out there called SCARF. And I think it's a really great way to look at why people engage or disengage or why they lean into a topic or fear. It's almost like a risk and reward type thing. And the S in SCARF stands for status. For some people, status is important. For some people, status matters. They want status. They like being around people of status. Other people, that they retreat from that. That's intimidating to them. So they're not going to be open. They're not going to share as part of it. And so just recognizing that that's going to be a play. But the employee listening, I do want to point this out too, doesn't need to just be at the highest level and at the frontline level. It's important that you have employee listening throughout the entire organization. That oftentimes managers, that middle manager layer, are the ones least heard, least listened to, because they're listening to the employees below them And the frontline, the leaders might be listening to what frontline say, but are they talking to managers? Are they listening to what they have to share, what their experience is? I think it's important that we address that listening throughout the entire company.
Yeah, it feels like we've been diving up the pressure on managers a little bit, both from a communication perspective, but also we're kind of in this constant change era that people talk about. And people talk about constant change. And I feel like the reality of implementing and embedding certain change, whether that's technology change, whether that's culture change in an organization, all relies on the manager. So do you think the way to fix that is to do better listening with managers? How do you think we can actually get over that?
Yeah, I think managers do get it from both ends. They've got teams or teams of teams that they're working on, plus they've got teams and teams of teams above them as well. I think when you bring up the change part is a particular interest because it is overwhelming to everyone. And managers have to sometimes kind of take in the change and then re-explain it to how it's then going to impact their team when they're just getting the larger business picture. But the interesting relationship we have with change is that if it can be overwhelming, but also if your organization isn't changing, that's also a problem because the rest of the world is evolving in some very good ways and some very frightening ways. So if your organization is not changing, is not evolving, that's also a problem. So I think the question, the $1 trillion question is how does everyone manage this? How does everyone manage this change? No one has that answer. There's the person that does the $1 trillion solution out there. It's so overwhelming to people, but I think it's just simply recognizing the fact that this is a lot for everyone to go through. So I think if you could attach one new skill to everyone out there, it would be patience, which is something even I'm not very good at. We joke in our house that I am at 100% patience because I don't use any of it. And so how do we recognize that that is a skill? Being patient, recognizing that there's a lot that people are going through at work and outside of work. Using that patience, again, I need to walk the walk.
So patience is that underrated skill. So kind of creating an environment where people, is it just to apply just in work or outside as well?
All of it. I think honestly all of it, because this idea of instant gratification, I think, has taken over our lives. Like being able to sit in discomfort, be able to sit in joy for a while without having to move on to the next thing. I think though another underrated skill that I would like to see everyone develop, I think lens around creativity, because also creativity takes patience. It takes time to do it the right way. I think creativity also sparks other creativity, also sparks people asking questions. When it's the same thing over and over and over, it becomes wallpaper to people. They just look past it. And so I would love to see everyone in organizations, because I do believe there will be people who say that they are not creative out there. It's a lie. Everybody is creative. We're just creative in unique ways. So how do we leverage that to then ultimately create a better experience for everyone in an organization?
I actually had this thought recently. Obviously, I'd kind of embedded AI in the workflow of my day. And one of the things, obviously, in business places, we get measured based on outcomes and KPIs. And so when you have AI to be able to elevate that a little bit, you can go through it quicker. And I realized recently you can get stuck in the process of the process. And it got to one day and I tried to, without AI, have an original idea for something. And I was like, hang on, I haven't given myself the space I've built a mindset based on process rather than the ability to pause, reflect, create. And that in itself is also not helpful. So it's something that I had a realization of, being like, I need to build creativity into my workflow and ensure that my mind doesn't become a process.
Yeah, I think that I view it as, I wouldn't say that I go to AI for ideas. I will use, whether it's typically Claude or Gemini, to help me build on my ideas, help me round it out, especially being a team of one running ICology. I don't have someone that I can bug all day long to be like, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? How about we do this? I don't like to think of AI as that partner, because I'm not giving it anything. It is always, I am sucking from it. I am pulling from it. But I do feel like it's a superpower where it's now letting me do things that I simply was not able to do, did not have the skills before. It's now building on what I'm good at, giving me that superpower. But also in that process, I am learning new things as well. I am learning things about coding and HTML and business finances and all these things around that I could have had to take the time and pause to go learn. But now by doing the work with AI, I am learning in the process of implementing those solutions.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, I love it. And I also agree there's a lot of the output that I get. My output has increased for sure. And there are some things that I never would have been able to do. So that's really cool. I guess understanding the relationship between that process and creativity for me, and how ensuring that I'm not outsourcing that. And those cogs keep working for me.
Well, I think that's the interesting part, that those are the interesting conversations that I see having, especially those in the comms world with AI, where there's a sense of fear at times, but also the sense of guilt at times of using it. And I'm like, well, that depends on how you're using it and why you're using it is where that guilt comes from. If you don't want it to write for you, then do not ask it to write for you. It will not do that on its own. But it's interesting to me that there's this guilt of using this tool to expand on what you're doing or build on what you're doing. It would be like someone feeling guilty going from using a typewriter to a computer. Like, where does this sense of guilt from? I think the only way guilt is there is whatever you're working on, you actually really don't understand, and you're putting work out there that you don't fully have a grasp on. I wonder if that's where the guilt comes in. I have zero guilt using AI because I know that what I'm using it for is building. It's not more. I'm not adding to the noise. I'm building things, and it's letting me do things that I just don't have the skills to do.
You raise an interesting point, and it's almost like communicators as a profession, have a lot of value to get from AI, but also at the same time, because of the profession, they also probably feel that guilt, and there probably is like a natural leaning towards the creation process, but it's just, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, I guess.
Well, I think someone told me that it's very common for developers when they're using an AI platform to help them write code, that inside the code, they will bury the prompt that they used so that a future developer can come in, read the code, see what they asked, how to keep building. It's almost leaving a roadmap for how it was done. I don't see communicators being that transparent with saying, oh, by the way, here's the prompt that I used to then create this thing. But counter to that, though, which I think is interesting, there's now a growing sentiment amongst developers that are now frustrated by organizations telling them, hey, you need to use these tools to write code faster. When the reason they got into developing is because they really liked writing code. That's what they wanted to do. And now they're being told, no, you've got to do it this new way where you're not actually doing the work. That's where I don't want comms to fall into that trap of having these platforms do the work that they actually really enjoy doing, because that then starts to take the joy out of the job.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've said this before, but it's kind of like also understanding like what friends is the technology to you, because I know within my group of friends, I'm not the shoulder that you cry on. I'm the person you come to if you want some logical advice, if you want to debate something out to get to their own conclusion. But it's like understanding like what parts of the role, what skills do you have? What do you enjoy doing? Putting those together to work out what type of friend is AI to you.
Well, and it's like, I know nothing about Excel formulas. Maybe the sum formula, and that's it, right? That's the basic stuff. But now, thanks to, I don't now need to know those. Mm-hmm. Like, what's the value in me and my role knowing all of those formulas? Nothing now. There's actually no value in me whatsoever. Before, I would have to go and seek out help to do things. Now I don't need to do the help. So the things that I need help with, I now have it. I have access to that. So I can then focus on the things that I enjoy doing, that I am really good at. I personally do not enjoy working in Excel or spreadsheets. So now I don't have to. I've got a partner that does that, helps me do that. I can focus on the work that I really enjoy, which I think then makes that work even better.
Yeah, excellent. I want to switch gears a little bit, finish on a bit of a fun note. Just got some quick fire questions. You just gave me an idea for the question right now, which is, so what would be your default application of Google Suite? Maybe slides, sheets?
I would say probably, Gmail. I would say that's probably the default.
Okay. That makes sense for a communicator, right? Yeah. My default application is probably PowerPoint or slides. Anytime I try to like articulate something, my default is to go to the PowerPoint suite, I guess.
And see, I would say for what you just described, where you go to slides and PowerPoint, I would say I go to Canva.
Okay.
When I'm just trying to think through ideas. I oftentimes think through them visually. So I'm in Canva, kind of just playing around with things, getting inspiration, all of that. I would say that's probably where I do spend that type of thoughtful time, creation time, all of that.
Yeah. Another couple of questions I wanted to ask you. One was to do with your podcast experience. You've done lots of different podcasts, from starting with ICology to now Frequency. That is a skill that a lot of communicators are having to start to pick up. Podcasting, working with leaders to get their voices out there. What have you learned from the process of lots of different podcasts, lots of interviews over the years? What have you learned from that process?
I would say, one, it is a lot of work. It is a lot of work running a podcast, and it's fun, it's enjoyable, but it's a lot of work. And so I always think about a podcast as this almost like campaign approach of, we're going to have multiple pieces of content. And anybody who says, hey, we're going to start a podcast, I'm like, just start producing audio first. Just start getting into that world and see if it becomes a thing. See if it becomes something that you wanted to come back to time and time again. I love that podcasting has gone internal for organization, because I think it becomes so much more accessible to people if done the right way. And there's wrong ways to do the back end hosting and all that. And there's some really great ways to do the hosting and make it accessible. But the accessibility also comes into getting a variety of guests. There's a lot of people that may not be comfortable being on camera, but having audio is a little bit easier for them. And so I love the idea of using audio to capture stories, because there's so much power in the human voice. Hearing what someone sounds like. Going back to like the employee listening part. You hear emotion, you hear passion, you hear excitement. You don't need to see those things to then experience those things. I think it's really cool how that comes through in the voice. And so I would ask communicators to be the conduit, be the host, be the facilitator of that. Put yourself out in front, be the one to help find those stories and tell them in a great way that becomes in so much more accessible through that podcast means.
What's one piece of advice you wish you'd known at the start of your career?
Well, it's which one I wish I would have known, and also one that I was given. And it sounds very odd, but it is learn how to use an iron. My very first job right out of college, it was a great experience. Had my 3-month review as part of transitioning from a kind of hourly employee to like a full-time employee. They were like, we love your work. We love your attitude, all of these things. By God, you have to learn how to use an iron. And I think it was that thinking like, okay, the work you do matters, but also how you present yourself matters. And so showing up in wrinkled clothes every day because you just got out of college isn't the best way to present yourself. And so to this day, so that is now close to 28 years ago, I am the person in our house that uses the iron. Like, I am the one that everyone asks for me to iron their clothes for them. I learned that skill because it got embedded in me that yes, you might do great work, but also how you present yourself matters as well.
Yeah, your predictions of the choir with that. I love planning outfits and working out like what impact is it going to make for the audience, etc. And I know Jenny as well, your co-host of Frequency, also, she taught me like ensure, especially when you're speaking, make sure you wear something bold so you're recognizable and people remember you. So yeah, presentation is not to be underestimated. My final question from me is, so we had this TV show in the UK in the 90s, which was called Room 101. And you would basically take a thing, which could be a physical thing or a concept, and put it in Room 101, which, for argument's sake, is essentially a trash can. Like, what one concept from the workplace would you like to put in the trash?
Oh, that is a really good question. I don't know. I feel like I'm trying to narrow down. I think when I come, I guess this is what I would throw in the trash from a comms point of view. There's 2 things I would throw in the trash. One, let's stop complaining about this seat at the table nonsense. Can we please end that and put that in the trash? And also, who should comms report to? I see this debated on a routine basis on LinkedIn. It's not helpful. You're never going to control where you report. It actually doesn't matter. It's more the personality of who you report to matters more than what department they're in. So I would put those 2 things in the trash.
Mm-hmm. Love that. And that's all my questions. asked our previous guest, who was actually Kim England. You met her at
Who I
Unite,
got to meet
think.
last year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we just had her on last week. She posed a question to you, not knowing it was you, but it was, are we here to make work better for employees or better for the business? And what changes if you answer honestly?
This is probably going to sound very crass and very American, but I think it has to be the business, because if things aren't good for the business, they're not going to be good for employees, like plain and simple. And I think that's why when you see things at companies like, well, they're so focused on profit. Yes, they leaders kind of need to be, but that shouldn't override every other thing that they do. Like, yes, you need to make things good for employees, but if things aren't good for the business, I could say I've worked at companies where the business hasn't been good. Working there isn't either at that point. Like, the business can't do the things it needs to do to invest in employees. So it doesn't feel right saying it, but I think that is the answer, that it's got to be what's best for the business.
Do you want to ask your question for the next guest? Don't know who that's going to be, but yeah, you get to carry on the tradition.
Yes. Okay. So this is the question I want to ask the next guest. There's a lot of critical elements to a great story and everybody's personal story. I want to know for your next guest, who is the villain in their story?
Oh, love that question. That is right on my street. Okay, cool. I'm going to report back on that because that is actually a great question.
Okay.
I think it's that's all. So thank you. Cool. We are done. Thanks, Chuck.
Absolutely. Thank you.
If you enjoyed the episode, then remember to click to subscribe because there's much more where that came from. And let us know in the comments which bits you enjoyed and found super insightful. Also, if you would like to be part of the EX conversation and feature on the podcast, then please get in touch.